Well, hello and welcome to another edition of No Nonsense with Pamela Wallen. Today on the program, a little bit of a double header. A little bit later on, we will talk with our famous pod panel, Mark Norman and Tasha Kheiriddin and Margaret McCuaig-Johnston. But we start with Darrell Bricker, the CEO of Ipsos Global, because the polls are just so fascinating at this point. It's just, some have the Liberals still ahead by great numbers. Others have them tied. It's just, Darrell, this is quite amazing. I've got your last two posts here. The Conservative Party has the most determined voters, as we see, of course, at the rallies and whatnot, but there's just not enough of them, kind of the high floor, low ceiling. And then the Liberal vote is complex and quite dependent on how much our friend Donald Trump is in the news. So give us a little bit of depth on that.
Well, you pretty much summarized it. I mean, the conservative vote is pretty enthusiastic. But I've been doing interviews, media people calling me, with the difference between the rallies and all the enthusiasm we're seeing and what we're seeing in the polling. And that's not unusual, to be honest. You can pack an arena, and it's a good thing. Campaigns should be doing it. It shows visual momentum. It shows that there are other people who actually agree with you if you're aligned with that particular point of view. But it doesn't mean that that's a majority of voters. I mean, If you look at Pierre Poilievre, there's a lot of people who like him, but there's a lot of people who really don't like him. 40% of the people that we interview strongly dislike him or disapprove of him. So you could probably put together another arena of people who are on that side of the agenda.
Well, what is that? Let me drill down, because you just hear reporters say this all of the time. Poilievre's negatives, people don't like. What is it? What are they telling you that they don't like about him?
I think that the kind of populist alignment, and I won't say Trumpian alignment, but the populist alignment that took place when he took over the leadership of the party. And it's not as much a substantive thing as it is a stylistic kind of presentation. A lot of it was really important when you were trying to draw a difference between the leader of the next government and the leader of the previous government. So in that context, I mean, they ran as good an opposition change campaign as you could. I mean, they had the highest numbers for Time for a Change I've ever seen. They were up to 78. And so it was really, really working for them. But when it changed, when the leader of the Liberal Party changed, the attempt to try and say Mark Carney is the same as Justin Trudeau just didn't ring true with people. People saw it as
they may not have known whether he was or not, but they weren't going to buy it on face value.
But also what happened is it was the two things. So it was the changing of the leader, but also the changing of the agenda. So if Kamala Harris had won the election, Pierre Poilievre would still, in my view, be way ahead. If Justin Trudeau had hung on and Mark Carney had not become the leader, I still think, even with Donald Trump winning the election, Pierre Poilievre would still be well ahead. It was the confluence of those two things that changed everything. So you go from a place where you've got a 25-point lead and you feel like everything's working for you, and then all of a sudden everything changes and you have to play catch up.
So on the Liberal,
and that's what they've been doing.
On the Liberal vote, the complexity, which I think is a good word, because does he represent the change? Does he need the crisis with Trump to actually move into that prime ministerial role? Like, we have this bizarre thing going on where, he goes back to Ottawa and says, I'm going to be prime minister today. And then, he's back on the campaign trail, as if there's any distinction there. There really isn't. But what else is at play there?
Well, I think I've said maybe on this show that the Mark Carney is not a good politician. I mean, it's not his natural environment. I don't mean to be critical of Mr. Carney. He's doing any one of us going out and trying to do what he's doing. It's a very, very difficult thing to do. It's not his natural thing.
Exactly.
The act of governing is his best campaign.
So
the more he can be away from the hustings, because he's not drawing huge crowds. He's not a great speaker. He's not a guy who motivates people to think that, you got to get behind him.
Yeah.
He's someone who comes across like what he is. So, but that's appealing to people in its right place, which is governing. So I find it funny when I hear reporters on the road, and Mark Carney's returning to Ottawa because he's forced to. No, he wants to. He
Yeah,
wants to
believe me. Yeah.
because he doesn't want to be out doing that other stuff because he's
Yeah.
not good at it. He's not comfortable at it. And being in Ottawa, performing in the role
Yeah.
that he's auditioning for is great.
Well,
For him,
it's a
sorry.
huge advantage anyway you look at it. I mean,
Yeah.
to be the incumbent, whether you've been the incumbent for 3 days or 9 years, there is some advantage. The other thing that I just find interesting, and all the different pollsters and you included are starting to look at all the regional fault lines, the generational fault lines, and of course the gender fault lines. Our friend Alan Gregg just was writing a piece on the latter, that women in droves are going to Carney. Young men are more likely to align with Polyev, but will they vote? So let's look at those three things. Let's start with gender. What are you finding?
Oh, yeah, that there's a big difference between the liberals and conservatives on gender. But I should say, the one word I kind of have just a modifying view on is the
Yeah,
word fault line. It
yeah,
sounds like it's a binomial distribution, which means
yeah. You're
all
right. You're
women are
right.
doing this and all men are doing that. No, there's both that are
Right.
conservatives are getting women voters too. They're just not getting them in the same proportion as the liberals, and the liberals are getting young men too, but just
Yeah,
not in the proportion that the conservatives are. So these tend to be more tendencies than fault lines.
yeah.
But what's
Good
really
point.
odd
Really
about
good point. Yeah,
them is one particular tendency is very different from what we've seen in the past. And that's older people voting for the Liberal Party, and younger people tend to be voting more for the Conservative Party, particularly young men. That's something that we've seen in other jurisdictions around the world, where young men have been rallying behind more populist type options
hmm,
on the political spectrum, and we're certainly seeing that in Canada, so that's something that's very unusual. The regional things that we're seeing are all very familiar. So
West, East, Central Canada.
when we talk about the West, not that I'm going to be a picky guy today, Senator, but I'm gonna just kind of maybe modify some of the
Yeah,
words. I actually don't like the term the West. I like the term the Wests.
yeah. I'm 100% with you on that because Alberta and Saskatchewan could not be more different than British Columbia and even Manitoba.
Correct.
Yeah,
So I think it's kind of lazy Eastern
yeah,
Laurentian thinking that there's this flyover territory that we call the West
right,
that we go to fly over on our way to British Columbia so we can go skiing at Whistler.
right.
Um, so, that's not true. And in fact, the more powerful element in Canadian politics, the one that's energizing a lot of Canadian politics right now, is the Wests.
Yeah,
So if you look at where the Conservatives do really well, when they win elections, it's putting together the Wests with suburban Ontario. That's where when they're
yeah.
doing that, it's when they win elections. That's what Stephen Harper did in 2011. So the interesting thing for me on the regional aspects of this, again, we're seeing those tendencies. We're seeing the Wests tend to be a bit more blue. Central Canada tends to be a bit more red, a lot more red these days. And Atlantic Canada is moving back into the red column. Atlantic Canada is interesting because they tend to be counterintuitive.
Hmm.
The last election campaign, the Conservatives lost the election, but did better in Atlantic Canada, and just about the only place in the country in which they
Yeah.
did. So that's the geography.
The well, maybe this one is a fault line, but I won't use the word. But the boomers and the Gen X, Y, Zs, let's go down there, although I think Z is a little bit different. But that almost, we've been reading about this for a couple of years now, that the Gen Xers are mad. Like, you guys had this wonderful life and you all had your homes and your gardens and your trips and your saving plans, and we didn't get access to that. And now you're going to decide who the government is and how that's going to impact our life. And we're kind of, not keen on the boomers, and are the boomers going to kind of write off their kids and say, too bad, so sad, wait till I'm dead, you'll inherit the house. It's a pretty tough fight.
That elbows up Mark Carney, Mike Myers ad sums this up beautifully.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's
Who's Mike Myers?
if you're a young Canadian, unless you maybe even watched it on DVD, Austin Powers or whatever, Wayne's World. I mean, he hasn't been on Saturday Night Live for 30 years. I mean, but that's what it was. It's this very nostalgic kind of quaint view of what Canada used to be, the Laurentian elite view of what Canada used to be. It's quite comforting for older Canadians, and they're trying to hold on to that.
Yeah,
they're trying to hold on to that. And then there's a younger group of Canadians who this country isn't working for, that are saying, both the left and right, saying we need to change. We need to change. So that's what's interesting to me. It's almost like Mark Carney is Lester Pearson.
Mm-hmm.
And we're kind of back to that version of the country. And when I saw that ad, the whole elbows up thing, it's like, I get it. I mean, Canadians are proud, but it was like, Gordie Howe.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not like contemporary Canada right now. I mean, even the symbolism, I mean, not really who Canada, these two gray-haired guys, both of them who've spent the better part of the last 25 years not living here.
Yeah.
Talking about a country that they remember, but they're not really part of right now, at least in terms of the overall social, the overall level of change that's taken place. They're not really representative of that. So Mark Carney, to a certain extent, is like comfort food for older Canadians. He kind of speaks to that set of demographics and set of issues and set of memories that they find really comforting. And then there's this other group of people that are going, hey, I can't get a house.
Yeah.
I'm really worried about my job. I can't pay off my student debt. I don't feel I'm making progress. I don't have a long-term view. I'm just trying to get by day to day. And you're yucking it up with this guy. I don't even know who he is, in hockey sweaters in a rink. I get how my parents and maybe my grandparents think this is great, but how does this work for me? And that's what's going on in Canada right now. So we can talk about it being about Trump, but Trump is just holding up a mirror.
Yeah.
He's just holding up a mirror to these things that exist in Canada. And you've got a group of people who are trying not to confront all of that stuff. They're trying to make it this external issue, which is Donald Trump and trade and tariffs. And they're trying to bring us into this kind of nostalgic view. It's like that Joe Canadian stuff.
Yes,
When John Ibsen and I wrote The Big Shift, we do a whole takeout on Joe Canadian versus a poem done by a guy named Shane Cozen, who opened the Vancouver Olympics. And it was like, look at these two poems. One's Canada today. One is what a bunch of a Laurentian elite people remember it as being. And it's back again. And it's like, no, it's not us anymore, folks. We've changed too much.
Sean's Spear, and of course you work with him at the Hub too. I'm a big fan of this. He was writing on the weekend about the kind of the luxury values that we have, and again it plays into this boomer versus the next gen's issue, which is the things that we have the luxury of caring about and thinking about just don't resonate, and whether that's a fair characterization.
It's the loss of the future. That's what this is about. It's the loss of the future that I dreamed of, that I'm being denied. So Pierre Poilievre represents change. I may not partly personally like him, but at least he represents change. This other guy is like chicken soup for the soul. He's like nostalgia. He's like something that Canada used to be. As I said before, maybe maybe I don't mean it, in any. Maybe there's a better analogy that we can point to, but he very much reminds me of Lester Pearson,
Yeah.
somebody who will keep the game going until we ran into John Diefenbaker and prairie populism.
Well, it was kind of Joe Biden after Trump first term. Let's just go back to somebody with white hair that's safe. I mean, we know what we know now, but
acknowledgement, there's this external acknowledgement of greatness.
Yeah.
The Nobel Peace Prize.
Yeah.
He spent a lot of time.
Yeah, no, you're right. Yeah.
I mean, if you read John Ibbotson's brilliant book, The Duel,
yeah,
you'll be surprised by how much time Lester Pearson was not in that.
Yeah.
But so he kind of reminds me of Mark Carney. This idea, this externally validated, really smart person who has the right pedigree for the times coming in to lead the Canadian government. At that time, I guess it worked. Maybe we'll see the same kind of thing here. But it is really a nostalgic view rather than, I would say, a contemporary view aligned with how particularly younger Canadians are feeling these days.
But I've got to say, Darrell, a lot of the people that I'm talking to in this, we watch the generational differences in the reaction to 51st State. Joke, that's how Trump talks. If he senses a weakness, which he did in Justin Trudeau, like he'll just play it to the hilt. He'll say it 55 times a day. All of that. But what I'm sensing is that there's also a fear. There's a fear about, and this is in the older generation more than the younger generation. There's a fear about what might happen. I mean, I've got intelligent friends who say to me, he could come across the bridges any day with troops. This is so dramatic. So that when we see what Trump did last week again, that just is feeding that. So are we back on the Trump and tariff as defining issue, or is time for a change coming back in?
For me, it's all one big ball of wax.
Yeah. Hard to separate.
Yeah, and the Liberals have done a really good job of saying we have this very calm senior statesman who is validated by external performance, who's a world-class mind and knows how to deal with these kinds of issues. Uncle Mark will take care of whatever needs to be taken care of. And as I said before, the older generations, it's a really appealing kind of message. He will hold on to what we have. And as a result of his positioning, it's not just about Trump. It's just, he will bring stability. That's what it is. And that's where Polyev, prior to the moment that we're in right now, was actually arguing about disruption. He was arguing about not keeping things as they were. He was presenting himself as an agent of change in a time in which people are feeling really threatened. So there's a lot going on here.
Yeah.
3 years to work it out. How it's going to end, I have no idea. I think that the political environment is incredibly volatile. What we do know, though, there's a few things that every poll agrees on. One of them is the NDP vote has collapsed.
Yeah. And is not likely to come back. There's no miracle solution to that.
Yeah. Well, the progressives could decide if they're going to give Jagmeet Singh another chance. If Mark Carney really fatally stumbles, maybe that can happen. But on its current trajectory, no, we're not seeing that. The second thing is that the Liberals are winning near where you need to win. So even the polls that are showing the two parties very close or tied, even those polls are showing a big enough need for the Liberal Party in Ontario and Quebec that they would be in a position where they would form. They're knocking on the door of a majority, and then there's other polls that are showing them further ahead.
Yeah.
But there's a consensus on both of those points. The other consensus points we've seen are the ones that you've pointed out. Older people tend to be voting more liberal. Younger people, particularly younger men, are voting more conservative. We still see the prairie provinces, including Alberta, still more likely to vote for the Conservatives than vote for the Liberals. We see the downtowns of the major cities.
Yeah.
We're voting for the Liberals. And one of the things that might be a little confounding on election day is that the NDP is cratered so badly that what we might be over measuring is the performance of the Liberals because they're doing so well downtown.
Yeah.
We'll need bigger samples to really look in precise definitions of the suburbs, but the races may be closer there.
Yeah. No, that's the thing. I mean, for the Conservatives, this seems to be the wisdom that if for the Conservatives to have a shot, the NDP would have to rebound, as would the Separatists in Quebec. There'd have to be kind of a real big rebound to take away from the Liberal growth and the Liberal lead.
Yes, all true. But interestingly enough, the Conservatives are polling better this time than they polled in any of the last 3 elections.
Yeah. The numbers are still, no, that's the confusing thing, that if this were ordinary times, they'd have a win here. Yeah.
Yeah, it's the collapse of the NDP. And I mean, one of the interesting stories of anybody, nobody writes about Canadian politics really.
No, just horse race. Yeah.
But the story of what the NDP, the 2 books I would love to write.
Yeah.
If I had, I'm writing another one right now with John Ibbotson, but I wish we could talk about at some point. But
yes, soon.
But the 2 that would be the most interesting, I think, would be what happened to the NDP.
Yeah.
What were they thinking? How is it possible that last fall or last spring that they didn't bring down the government?
Well, this is the thing. I mean, to save their own skin, if they had
they destroyed
an election, they'd be in Jack Layton territory.
Well, because the progressive voters would have abandoned Justin Trudeau. All they did was hand them back the timing of the election and the possibility that they could change leaders for nothing. They'll argue that it was some policy outcome, please. And then the other book I want to write, I would call it 3 Days in December.
Yes, the phone call, the change of mind. I'm going to be your finance minister. No, I'm going to now run for prime minister.
What actually happened?
Yeah.
Because that would tell us an awful lot about me.
This drives me crazy. These questions aren't even asked at these so-called press scrums. Nobody has yet to ask Mr. Carney that question. What had you promised
us? About reporters these days. I love the media, but I'm going to be critical at this point.
Just this once.
Why is it that they feel that running like a maniac and typing up press releases on your computer and doing stand-ups in front of the images that the parties present for you is any form of reporting?
Yeah. As Bill Fox would say, it's just stenography, right? You're just taking notes at that point.
Bill, I love Bill. Yeah, and he's right about that. But it's just like, where is the great insight? Where are the really well-reported? John Ibbotson talks about this to me, the really well-reported columns, where people actually go in and interview people and have a point of view that's different from I'm sitting in my office in Ottawa today, and I thought this would be interesting. And I'm going to tell you, and somehow I involve myself as a character in the story. That's what it is.
No, it's exact. I mean, well, it's like watching the CBC ask repeatedly over and over again about whether their funding is going to be guaranteed. The election's actually not about you. The election is about all these other issues.
Yes, I want somebody to give me the 3 days in December because
I think you're going to have to write it. Okay,
I'm going to ask you what kind of thinking went into what the NDP did. That would be interesting. And also having a camera in the Conservative war room right now would be fascinating.
Yeah, those are really interesting thoughts. I'm sorry to interrupt. I know our time's running out here, and I really want to ask you this because I know you've just come back. You do run, for the sake of our listeners and viewers here, a global company, Ipsos Global. This is 44 countries. You do what you do in Canada everywhere. So you're meeting with all these people. I don't know whether you ask them or whether they volunteer. From that perspective, what are they seeing on this side of the ocean, whether it's Trump and us? And did anything come clear to you?
Yeah, so first of all, I run Ipsos Public Affairs, which is a segment of Ipsos.
Yeah.
So Ben Cleaves is the overall CEO of Ipsos.
All right. Okay, a tiny promotion.
I was going to say they'd never trust me with anything like they trusted them. But I'm very happy to be where I am. But I have heard The last time I've heard this much interest in Canada was when Justin Trudeau was elected. I
Yeah.
remember being in the UK just after that election, and they were going through Brexit. And it was people coming up to me and saying how lucky Canada was to have Justin Trudeau. I mean, people outside of the country were very enthusiastic
Yeah.
about Justin Trudeau. Like it was a step in the right direction.
They
It
remembered Daddy. There was all this stuff.
But it was also his like physical appearance and his
Yeah.
energy and his humor and everything else. At the start, it really worked well until it didn't.
Yeah.
But it was kind of like that when I went back last week, except it was, oh my God, what's it like living next door to the United States? What did Donald Trump actually do? So it was people really, and I was in a global meeting, and so it was people from all over the world coming up to me, and instead of saying, hey, how are you doing? The
Yeah.
question more, hey, how's Canada doing? What's it like
Yeah.
to live next door? And what are you afraid of? I mean, boy, we're reading about all of what he's doing to Canada. That's really, it must be very stressful. And it was like, yeah, it kind of is, but you guys seem a bit more stressed than I am.
Exactly.
Yeah, but yeah, so people very interested in Canada as a harbinger
Yes.
of what could come next, or what the effect of Donald Trump's decisions are, or how they're going to accumulate.
Well,
And that's really something I'm not used to.
yeah. Well, and for today, we'll say that the NAFTA agreement at least saved us a bit, right? I mean, Mexico and Canada, some protections from it. Who knows what happens tomorrow or the next day? But Darrell, great to talk to you. Thank you very much. And as I said at the beginning, we're going on to our next phase now, our pod panel. Guys that, women and men, I was going to all try and mix it, but we'll do that next time. We'll do that next time. So thanks very much. We'll talk soon.
Enjoy the panel.
That's great.
Bye.
Darrell Bricker, who runs the world, according to me, but he won't claim credit for it all. So, as promised, coming up just in about, I don't know, 5 seconds, we're going to talk to our pod panel, Mark Norman, Tasha Kheiriddin, and Margaret McCuaig-Johnston. So some very interesting points there from Darrell on what public opinion really is, if there is such a thing as Canadian public opinion when you break it down on gender and regional differences, and of course the age factor. So now a conversation with these are my favorite people that we do this little our pod panel. So Tasha Kheiriddin, who is a journalist and a lawyer, and she writes a column for the National Post, and she runs her own PR company and all of that. Margaret McCuaig-Johnston, longtime academic and civil servant and a China-Canada expert. So we'll talk about that. And Mark Norman, senior defense strategist at Samuel Associates. And this man, 40 years of service to his country, and last served as the vice chief of the defense staff. So welcome to you all. Great to see you. So we're talking on Monday, and in 15 minutes, the world can change, but we'll just carry on and leave it up there. So one of the things, Tasha, and I'm going to go to you first because I'm sitting here looking at a piece you wrote going, Carney's boomer bet could go bust, because we've talked about that extensively, that the boomers, for a lot of the obvious reasons, have put their eggs in the Mark Carney basket, and the younger generation who are still living in the basement and can't, buy a house are just saying maybe we need some change here. What was your case? What was your issue?
My take was very similar to that, is that people who have things to protect, whether they're boomers or Xers, want security. They are looking for someone who will be stable, who will help them navigate awful times. We're seeing the markets going completely berserk. And when I wrote this, they were, they weren't great, but they weren't what they are now. It's even worse. So if you're invested, if you're anywhere close to retirement or after retirement, you don't want change. You don't want fuss. You want to save what you have. Younger generations, and we see this by the polling, who are unable to get that foothold, are looking for change, and Pierre Poilievre cultivated them for the past 2 years on this message. Can't buy a house, can't get out of the basement of your parents, can't take a girl on a date because you have nowhere to take her. I mean, he's used that language. It's pretty grounded stuff, but he hits a nerve. And so you're seeing an inversion of what you usually see, which is that older voters tend to be more conservative and younger voters tend to be more liberal. The challenge will be, and the question will be, which group turns out at the polls. And traditionally, younger voters are not as reliable. So if you go on that basis, then you'd think, well, the older folks will turn out. They will turn out for the liberals because that's who protects their stuff. The younger voters may be angry, but they won't be out. Not too sure that'll hold because right now, anger is a big motivator for these younger voters. So they may turn out. So
And what we're seeing at the rallies as well with huge.
Exactly. The rallies show a lot of that discontent. So if the discontent turns out, then the polls we're seeing right now, with that show a massive liberal potential majority, may not be as accurate.
Yeah. Well, that's what, of course, what all good pollsters say, but certainly what we heard from Darrell, which is it ain't over till it's over. And as we know, probably 25% of voters don't even make up their minds until the last 48, 72 hours as to what they're going to do. So, Mark, to you on this discussion we were having about the luxury beliefs, it's a little bit the same, that the older more comfortable, even the wealthier saying, let's just put the old banker in charge here. He's got a suit. As Darrell was saying, he reminds him of Lester Pearson, right? Just that, nothing bad can go on. Versus what we're seeing from a whole new generation of people.
Yeah, so look, I agree completely with what Tasha has described based on things that I'm hearing from my own circle of friends and advisors. But fundamentally, if you look at this from a national perspective, that the issue, and I'm looking through a defense and security lens specifically. Right. One of the key issues here is some variation or modification of the status quo an acceptable path forward, or do we need fundamental change? And in that specific context, we can't do A, what we need to do, and B, what we're expected to do. And those are two different buckets of requirement with the existing mechanisms, attitudes, policies, cultures, behaviors that we've seen over the last couple of decades, and in the last decade in particular. And I'm trying not to be political about this, but the reality is we can't just keep doing things the same way and expecting a different outcome. Right. And as it relates to defense and security specifically, there's some major structural problems here that have to be fixed. And we're not going to be given the latitude, runway, and freedom of maneuver to look at this and study this and analyze this and come up with all sorts of machinery of government approved options to get us where we needed to be 5 years ago. So there is a sense of urgency to this. The urgency then is risky because we can do things quickly and poorly, or we can do them smartly and relatively quickly. But there needs to be some significant change, and I'm talking about procurement reform. I'm talking about how we get people into the armed forces and keep them in the armed forces, what the armed forces is focused on. I mean, there are some major issues, and I could steal the entire hour on that alone, but I'll just kind of set the stage there for the conversation.
Yeah, no, and I will. I'll ask Margaret to be patient because I just want to go for one more minute on that. A mutual friend of ours, Wayne Eyre, the former chief of the defense staff, he's from Wadena, Saskatchewan. So of course he's a very important.
It's all you need. All you need.
All you need really in life. It's the only credential that matters. But he wrote a very long and substantive piece on this very issue, which is, we've had problems for a long time. There's money in the system. We can't seem to get decisions on when and how to spend it in a timely way. And now with all of this these many other issues, like, are you going to defend your North, or do we need to come in and do it for you? So saith Donald Trump, right? So, we've actually got to do something. And on procurement, we can talk all we want about buying Canadian, but what the heck are we going to buy that we make here anymore? It's part of the other issue that we've got. So, Mark, just another minute on that, and then we'll go to Margaret.
Yes. So in reverse order of how you laid it out, last thing you said, actually much more than you think.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to provide a shopping list of things that we
But
could.
there are some ships going on that.
Well, it's even more than that. There are literally thousands of small to medium companies here in Canada who are in some ways already doing amazing things or could do amazing things in certain technologies and all sorts of things. And I don't want to complicate this for your listeners, but the bottom line is there is already significant potential in Canada to do many things. We'll never do everything, and nor should we. But there's a lot of stuff we already do well that we should be doing more of, and there's some stuff that we don't do yet that we should be doing for our own national interests. So that was the last part of your comment.
Yeah.
The second one was with respect to the machinery. That's one of the things I was alluding to, the machinery procurement. Look, we know this is broken. We've been talking about it. You know, the last 3 or 4 governments have all committed to fixing procurement, and it's just an endless cycle of broken promises. The reality is that it's way too complicated. There's way too many overlapping and conflicting authorities in the system. There is no sense of urgency. Everybody in that complicated system is accountable for something other than actually delivering the capability. The institution of defense has a whole bunch of its own problems, which are not making it easier. But the bottom line is, to be blunt, we need to blow this whole thing up and rebuild it from first principles, but we need to do it quickly because we don't have the luxury of building the perfect mousetrap, to use that language.
Yeah, because we've waited too long.
And as to your first comment with respect to, you know, the kinds of things we should be doing, you know, my advice openly would be, well, how about we start with making sure we can defend our own backyard? And we can't. And to me, that's the simplest foundational failure. And it's part of the reason that we have no credibility when we try to have these conversations. So that requires a significant shift in our mindset from a defense and security perspective, because we've always thought about how we can do good things elsewhere in the world, as opposed to how we sort out our own backyard, to, as I said, and it requires a complete refocusing of how we do things. And I'll just leave it at that.
No, and it's great. It gets me to Margaret exactly, because, you know, lots of people have been concerned for many years to the degree to which we've allowed China to operate in the north with, you know, not even a pair of binoculars on our part to watch what they're doing. And that issue is rearing its head again. And I think we saw it in part with the candidacy of Paul Chiang, for reasons that not even liberals can explain. Mark Carney continued to back him so strenuously for so long. He's now been replaced by a guy who may be just as compromised. So thoughts on a couple of those things?
Well, thank you, Senator. And I guess I would start with Mark's point about urgency. You know, we can do the best things when we're stuck and we need to move quickly. That's when we can really get, I think, as a country, get everybody on the same page and get things done fast. It's an opportunity period of time. And, you know, focusing on Canada's Arctic, I think, is important, as well as, you know, just hiring all the military forces that we need. You know, our HR in the military has been so slow. We've got so many people applying. We need to ramp that up as well. I was pleased to see that Carney was suggesting in the Arctic, not just a military base at Iqaluit in the east, but also at Tuktoyaktuk in the west. I think that's the right thing to do. But as you say, China is a big concern there. They're working very closely with Russia to use Russia's access to the Arctic and learn as much as they can from Russia through their R&D lab and so on. You mentioned the Markham
Paul
riding and
Ching, yeah.
Paul Chang. That was so disturbing to see Paul Chang make a real effort to get people to think about capturing Zhou Tai and taking him to the Chinese consulate so he could be sent to Hong Kong and stand trial on trumped up charges. You don't do that in Canada. You don't ever say that in Canada. You don't even think that in Canada. The fact that he did all of that, it was not a joke. Some people have tried to pass it off as, oh, it was just an offense. People
No,
did.
I think we've all watched enough of it to know he was not kidding. Yeah.
He was not kidding. And the fact that Carney did not instantly cut him loose is mind-boggling. And, the guy himself had to resign when he realized the RCMP was doing an investigation. Maybe he better step down.
Yeah.
And so Carney was kind of let off the hook. Carney had an opportunity to show that he's different than Justin Trudeau, who has deep ties with China, and that he has a very strong ethical backbone. And he failed on both of those counts. And it's just so disappointing.
Yeah, this new candidate that they've put in seems to have just as questionable a background and motivation as Mr. Chang.
He has very deep ties to the organizations in China that manage the Chinese diaspora in other countries. And so he's part of that management process. That's very concerning. So we'll have to watch that carefully. But we also have to see what Carney is going to be doing in the longer term with China. He met with Xi Jinping a year ago. He was part of a delegation of what was called American business leaders, American business executives who went to China for an economic discussion with Xi Jinping. It helped Xi put some ruffles on his material for his economy that showed that he was in touch with big thinkers in the business world. And then he went again in October. Right. And so I think we're going to be watching this with concern, particularly since we're now learning today from the Globe and Mail that WeChat messaging is coming out from China, from Beijing, saying that Mark Carney is able to stand up to Trump. Trump will have a strong prime minister in Canada to go up against.
Meaning it will be helpful to China.
It will, I think he'll be seen to be the guy to vote for because he'll be able to go up against Trump.
This is, it really puzzles me, and I'd like to hear from all of you on this because there is no question that this falls into the category of foreign interference. And
think?
And it didn't seem to grab the public attention. We had the whole Hogue inquiry. We went through this. We've got these candidates. It was, today is the last day to change out your candidates. So we're candidates anywhere. So we're assuming that there'll be more opposition research from both sides trying to, take down a few candidates. But it just hasn't. I don't know, Tasha, why don't we care more about this issue as Canadians? Why are we not outraged by this?
I think, and I hate to say this, we're less outraged because the US is being such jerks. This is the problem. No, and it is a dilemma for the government. Carney, in fairness, has said, he did make a statement before the Chang affair that we should pivot our trade or open up trade with countries that are like-minded in their values and not China. He specifically said not China. So that is a good thing.
Yeah.
Now, the problem is there's a lot of pressure from the business community and others saying, well, if the US is an unreliable partner, as Carney has also said, that, we're in a new world now, that we should be looking at all other avenues for our trade, and that includes China. I was reading an op-ed the other day. I'm trying to remember who wrote it, but I was stunned and annoyed that it said, it lamented the fact that our relationship with China was so bad and we should get it back to the point where we nearly had free trade with them in 2018. If you recall, there was that movement for free trade with China. So Carney, if he wins, whoever wins, honestly, whoever becomes prime minister will be facing this tug of war between, okay, since the US are such bad apples, we got to look elsewhere. Oh, gee, there's Beijing being really friendly. This is the opening for China, right? So it's going to be a struggle. So I think many Canadians are having that struggle too. If you're a small business or you're somebody who's being screwed over by these tariffs, you're saying, I got to keep my business afloat. I'm going to look anywhere I can. And China is putting the squeeze on our agriculture, right? In terms of canola, they're putting our squeeze on our seafood in terms of lobster. There's things they want us to change. So the question will be, okay, if we do that, to get that, what's the quid pro quo, right?
Yeah, but it would be helpful if Mr. Carney was saying that. I mean, this is a $40 billion industry, the canola industry.
Yep.
And
it is. That for where you're sitting, it's huge out west.
It's a huge issue.
So how is he going to square that circle? That is the issue. So everyone is. So I think most Canadians are torn too. They are. Yeah. That's why the foreign interference piece is less of an albatross.
Low end of the income scale, you want to be able to go to Walmart or the
that too,
because you're trying to buy your groceries. So we'll just come around to Mark on this one, because this is we live next door to the US. They are probably always going to be our largest trading partners, and Donald Trump is there for the next 3.5 years, maybe, we don't know. It's, to declare that we're going to change our whole focus in the world because of the antics of the current incumbent in the White House, when we are connected at the hip, 5,000 miles long, we're always going to have north-south trade. So that, don't we need to kind of say that at some point? Look, we're fighting with them now, but it's not the end of the Canada-US relationship. We're especially in the face of, warming up to China.
Yeah, so there's a whole series of overlapping tensions, intellectual, political tensions, as Tasha's described, and in your question, and there's an ideological element of this. There's a practical element of this, and there's an emotional element to this. And at the moment, going back to the first round of the conversation, most Canadians legitimately are focused on the material and practical aspects of the challenges in their lives. And you know what? I mean, they shouldn't have to have those challenges, but equally, they shouldn't have to be worrying about those other things. So to your comment about the outrage, I agree with you completely. But fundamentally, on the scale of things that people are worried about, that's probably not the most. As the saying goes, that's not the closest wolf to their sled at the moment, right? So they're dealing with other concerns. And as it relates to the trade options, I was reading something the other day, and when you start looking at the numbers, this goes back to what we were discussing earlier. What would be needed in order to actually start to generate trade with what I will call like-minded but non-traditional trade partners? It's enormous. It's just it's more than a pivot. Okay. The pivot is how you put it on a bumper sticker or the PowerPoint brief. It's how you actually start to do this. And it's massive change. And we're talking orders of magnitude in terms of the actual volume of trade, the mechanisms, how industry is set up. Look, we have the system we have because it was easy. Let's be blunt.
No, it's right there.
It's been exactly
drive across the border. It's easy.
Right. And everything has been oriented that way, culturally, organizationally, infrastructure, everything. And so, and to your other comment, I'm just kind of responding to the things you're saying. I'm far more concerned about how ingrained some of these systemic and foundational shifts that are happening south of the border are or are not than I am about the talking head. Okay.
Yeah.
Who may come, may go. The question is how lasting are some of these ideas, and therefore how much systemic and structural change do we actually implement? And this is it's a bit of a moving target, and I understand why this is hard. But it doesn't mean we can just stick our heads in the sand and pretend, well, it's hard, so we'll just
No,
kind of.
and Margaret, I'm going to say to you, as somebody that is old enough to remember that Pierre Elliott Trudeau talked about the third option, and we were going to go and trade with Europe, and we were going to break our dependence on the US. The problem is, how would we send our oil and gas to other markets when we don't even have a pipeline? We can't even get to the respective coast to maybe send it to somebody else.
Yeah, we haven't done the homework
Right.
and the infrastructure building to get that done. And that's one of the big challenges. That's one of the big opportunities we have now to get rid of a lot of the regulation, a lot of the procurement crap, and get that kind of thing done. I actually was in the Pierre Elliott Trudeau Privy Council
Yes.
office at the time that he was marketing the third option. He was really looking at Europe.
Yeah.
And Mark Carney has talked about Europe, but I think what we really need to do to supplement what we might be losing with the US, and I'll come back to that in a minute, is double down on the Indo-Pacific strategy, which I don't include China in that. We've got new free trade agreements across the Indo-Pacific. So that homework over the last year has been done. It's a $2.3 billion initiative. It's got defense security as part of it. We can do more on that as well. So I think we need to take that opportunity now to double down there if we're looking at other potential markets. I think we need to be concerned about China potentially dumping into Canada the products that they're not going to be able to sell into the States. So we need to be aware of that. And in fact, Trump just today threatened to add an additional 50% tariff on China if they did not withdraw their 34% tariff that they had announced 5 minutes ago. And so this is all getting out of hand, and it's all quite ridiculous, but it's the world that we face now. And so, I think Mark's got some good points in terms of the US isn't going to go away, and we need to be looking at what we can retrieve now from that trade relationship. I think renegotiating the USMCA in a rational trade negotiation would be a very good idea, as opposed to leaving us open for these sectoral tariffs. So we've had autos already, we've got aluminum and steel. Trump was making noises about forestry products a couple of days ago. We've got dairy on the horizon. We need a rational negotiation of that. And I'm sure that our ambassador is in at Department of Commerce and USTR, Trade Representative's office, to talk about.
When she's not flying to Ottawa to have meetings with, the Team Canada. I guess this is the big issue of having all of this stuff land in the middle of a leadership and an election campaign. When the election should have obviously been held much earlier on, so that we were ready to meet the November result, whatever it was. Tash, I don't know whether this is, it's just kind of kicking around in my head, but It was a very dramatic, strong statement from Mark Carney about our relationship with the US as we know it is over, it's done, we need a new world. And I know part of that is that he does better on the campaign trail when he's campaigning as prime minister as opposed to candidate. So he needs the crisis, and I'm the guy that can stand up in the crisis. And then we're hearing from the Poilievre side because he's kept it more open and he's also not in a position to do much about it. We've just got to focus on getting that agreement renegotiated and having some rules of the game clear. Do you see much light between those two? Is it something that the voters in that last 48, 72 hours are going to say, maybe I like this approach better than that approach, or is it just all kind of one and the same?
Well, at the end of the day, both of them would be renegotiating. In fact,
Yeah.
Carney got Trump to agree. That was one thing he did say, that Trump agreed that after Carney's reelected, because he says, well, I'll see you later
Right.
after the election, we'll renegotiate. So both of them would be, I don't see any daylight on that. I don't even understand why the conservatives are saying this is a point of difference. It is not. It is not a contradiction to say the relationship we had is over, time to renegotiate, because you're implying that that relationship is over, so we need something new. Carney is saying the same thing that Keir Starmer said over the weekend in the UK, that the world as we know it is gone, or over, or whatever the last word is. But it's the same thing. It's a very dramatic pronouncement, but he's not wrong. It is. And whether Trump's there for 3.5 years or for more, that people are talking, I think the chaos he has sown is not just of his making. There are other actors who in his administration would support this continuing. I mean, he got this idea from Navarro, Peter Navarro, Lutnick is on board. Like all these people and other layers of people have also interest in this. And this remaking of the world. I do think that Trump, ultimately his goal is to break China. That is his goal.
Right.
I just don't think
he's
trying to do it from a security perspective by prying Russia away from China over Ukraine. That's not really going that well right now, but he's trying. He is trying to break China's economy. And I just think he's doing it in such a clumsy, crazy way.
Yeah.
That's not going to work. But that's what he's trying. So the problem for us too is that if we're soft on China, Washington is not amused. And that's why the issue with Carney and that candidate Chiang was an issue for foreign policy, because people in Washington did notice. They're like, what's going on there? And they've hated Canada for a while now. And Marco Rubio has made lots of statements even before the November election that Canada is a conduit for Chinese immigration to the U.S., illegal immigration. It is a conduit for espionage, for all sorts of bad things from China. So, we got to clean up our act on that.
Shorthand. Let me put it this way to you, Mark, really, just like we're seeing, and I was just listening to some American analysis this morning, that the pressure's going on Trump. Look at the markets. His own, there's a lot of people inside his own party, including Elon Musk, saying, hold the phone here, right? Like this has got some huge implications, that already Trump is looking for that face-saving win. So if a couple of big countries come to the table and say, okay, we agree, we'll take our tariffs off and then you take yours off, that even, this week he could declare victory. My policy worked. I told you it would work. And then he'll get on to whatever else is on his agenda at this point, so that we shouldn't go too far down the road of saying, oh, the whole world has changed and nothing will ever be the same again, when it might be by, Friday.
Yeah. So, well, this is another great example of those tensions that I was there. These tensions are now baked into our reality, as Margaret was saying. Like we can't pretend that this stuff is not there. I mean, it's a joke in the military. Hope is not a method, and
or a strategy,
or a strategy, right? So we have principles of warfare for a reason, and one of them is not hope. So but to your point, yes, and this is where, what's the right balance? What's the right approach? And there needs to be a consistency to this. We can't, and the problem, and you said it, Pam, that we're so inwardly focused right now that we literally can't see the forest for the trees because we're so distracted. And this whole issue around, will it change? Will it not change? In the positive side of this, and I know there's a lot of chaos out there, and I'm part of that generation that's watching numbers drop as opposed to numbers grow. And look, I that's an uptown problem, and I fully recognize it. However, this is not sustainable. And so, but you look at it and think, all right, so we have enormous opportunities to reset some of these kind of unquestionable assumptions that we have made for decades about how things should or shouldn't go. And, picking up on both Tasha and Margaret's point, but there's one thing we shouldn't do, and that's, you cozy up to China now. You think that the Washington's pissed off at us now? Well, try that one. Try that option behind door number 3 and see what happens. It's just, and this is where I'm not being helpful. I hope, if I'm not being helpful, at least I hope I'm being entertaining. This is not easy, and it's a lot harder when we've got 2 people trying to get elected, neither of whom really knows exactly how they're going to navigate this, or at least they're not going to talk about it publicly, because the people that they're trying to either hold on to or to grab as voters may not like how they have to do this. And this is, we're trying to do this the way we want it to be, as opposed to the way it has to be. And that is part of our culture in Canada. We cannot, one of the things we have to change is we cannot pretend to live in the world that we want.
And we want to be loved. We want to be the nice ones
that we're in. And that world right now is not playing in our favor. And we've got to wake up and realize it.
Margaret, jump in.
Yeah, please. Really, really good point. You set up the points I wanted to make really well, Mark. I think we need either party, whoever wins, we have to be grounded. As soon as the PM appoints cabinet, we have to have our fiscal act in order. And what I'm getting at here is we're at a time of great uncertainty. We're going to have ructions in various sectors. We've got it in automotive big time right now, and we'll undoubtedly have it in others. This is not the time to be handing out climate change checks. This is not the time to be giving tax breaks when we may need that money for a social safety net for the people who are directly affected by all this change. This is really not the time for high-speed rail. Let's just take that off the table completely. Can you imagine an automotive worker thinking it's a priority for him to buy a ticket to visit Quebec City on high-speed rail? He has to get there like 2 hours faster. When he's concerned about, what does KD cost today? These are real issues that we're going to be facing, and we need to get our fiscal act in order. One might think that a former governor of the Bank of Canada might be best to do that, but some of the early signals I see are, spending here, spending there. Carney has an interesting approach of reducing our operating costs. He hasn't indicated anything that he would cut there, but
new budgeting. That's the
and then new budgeting, and then do investments. And I do see them as investments. I think investments in our defense, investments in our pipeline infrastructure, investments in our roads to get to critical mineral sources. I think all of that needs to be done. But in order to do that, we have to have money available to do it. And
Well, and
so,
if we shut down the oil and gas sector, for example, we won't have a lot of money in the coffers.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So that there are some big opportunities, but we need to have the fiscal room to do them. And I see the wrong signals being sent.
Yeah. Tasha, just on that point, because I think maybe the housing plan is really an obvious one of, um, we're from the government and we're here to help. That is this really the answer to put a government department in charge of housing to change the way we add up the debt and divide the deficit up so that the numbers look better? I mean, we really do have, to Mark's earlier point, an ideological, a philosophical difference here too about who should be the answer to the problems we're facing as we deal particularly with this cross-border issue we've got.
So I think the housing that Mark Carney's proposal is echoing the wartime plan that was post World War II when we built, and he said, here are the houses and they're still standing and these nice little houses. And okay, that was a very different time. It was a returning population. You had, it was immigration. It was people who were young mostly and were going to be sitting in those houses, raising families, paying taxes, working at whatever job they could find. So it was also seen as a bit of a reward or a support
they had
for
just
our veterans.
Served your country and gone
Correct.
to war. Yeah.
Correct. Sorry. Yeah. Someone's trying to get through and argue with me. I'm sorry. That's going to have to ring. So that time called for that kind, and there was support for that among people in the population to have that happen. But now, who are these houses going to be for? There are going to be some for the young people, yes, who can't get out of the basement. But our population growth is driven by immigration. So you're basically going to be building houses for people coming here from other places who may not be able to afford them either, and who are not necessarily, we're not rewarding people. It's a very different mindset. So I think that while his idea of let's get the homes built is a response to the conservatives and their plans, like let's build, all these homes, I think it's not the right approach to have government in the home building business. This is not World War II. I think that the issue with homes right now partly is demand. So immigration has been driving the demand. We have to rethink that piece. And he's not talking about that, right? I mean, Mark Miller made a bunch of changes and the government's capped things, but we're still letting in 500,000 people a year for jobs that may not be there anymore now. Look what's happening to all the sectors that are going to be shutting down because of the tariffs and the knock-on effects that's going to have on all these businesses that depend on this, whether it's retail, service, hospitality, food, workers who can't afford to go and buy their coffee anymore at the local Tim Hortons that was hiring immigrants. Hello. So it's simplistic is my point. It's simplistic and I don't think it makes sense.
And if you want to know how well federal government house building programs go, talk to the Department of National Defense.
Right.
Yeah, good point.
Right?
Yeah.
So one of the big
soldiers. Yeah, exactly.
This national crisis, which is a legitimate crisis for all the reasons Tasha's laid out, affects the military community even more acutely because they don't have the luxury of going where they want. They go where they're told. And we've been talking about making housing a priority for 20 years and we haven't done a goddamn thing. So I don't have I like the idea for the historic reasons that Tasha's laid out, and it's a big idea. I have no confidence in the machinery of government in its current construct to deliver on any of these big ideas. Yeah. And that's one of my biggest concerns. I know you were going to ask me something else, but I
do think that you've spoken to it because it's, if we think we can resolve this problem with a COVID 2.0 response, which is just send everybody a check and tell them to wait, it is not going to work. In part because we've been through it once and we know what the consequences are of spending that kind of money. And then to your point, which is government the best delivery mechanism? And there's very little evidence that it is.
But you're your COVID example, there are some great lessons that I don't think we learned, but we should go back and
Yeah.
perhaps relearn from COVID in a variety of areas. Start with, don't get rid of stuff that you think you don't need now because you may need it in the future. And it's a hell of a lot easier to keep building it now than it is when you're in a crisis, i.e., how about we have some sovereign capability in a few key areas that are important to us as a society? Hey, there's a crazy idea. The second lesson that I think we can learn is when we want, and this, Margaret made this point earlier, when we really want to do something, we can actually do stuff. And we kind of get out of our own way. So why do we have to be in a crisis? We are in a crisis, but why can we not apply that mindset to a lot of these other challenges that we're facing? And
I mean, the irony of all of this is that this is partly what Donald Trump is saying. What we figured out in COVID is we couldn't provide anything for ourselves, so I'm going to repatriate and reindustrialize America, and here's the price tag, getting that all back.
And that's the thing. Sometimes he's right. A broken clock is right twice a day, right? Like he and the problem is we have such a visceral emotional reaction to the other, but you know what? Every once in a while, the guy actually makes a really good point. And when you're depending on other people for stuff you need as a society, you probably need to think that through.
I could jump in for 1 second. I agree with Donald Trump. The infuriating thing about him, I think he is right to look at China as the major threat. I think he's wrong the way he's going about dealing with it. That is the issue.
That everybody else is getting sideswiped in the fight instead of taking the fight on. Margaret, it must drive you nuts that we see foreign policy, so many key issues. We're still watching Hamas protesters on the street. We're still sending money to them to support the Palestinian, all of this stuff. And it's not even being discussed in this election campaign.
Well, and international really never is discussed.
Yeah.
What is being discussed is the US.
Yeah.
And so in that sense, this is an unusual election. We do have a big elephant in the room, and how we deal with it is going to be a major challenge. So each prime minister is trying to present himself. Each leader is trying to present himself as the person who can solve that. It's quite interesting to see the NDP presenting themselves as the next government. I don't think anybody in the world is seeing that, and the fact that they would try to do that is beyond me. But they have some interesting social policy proposals for
it's
people.
Just completely irrelevant, except that the impact they're having on the Liberal vote, because everybody's just gone back to the Liberal, and again, that is Mr. Singh bringing that on himself.
That's right.
An election he could have had where he might have been, a little more successful.
But I think Mark and Tasha have made some good points in terms of we need to deal with Donald Trump, and we need to keep our wits about us. We need to have the resources to fill in the blanks when sectors are under stress, as we're seeing. And we need to be able to keep that relationship going as best we can. And we have a lot of sympathy, as we've seen with the vote in the Senate, and a lot of the governors are supportive. So we have some long-term strength in the US on Canada's behalf.
Yeah, that's all my point is that this relationship will be there when all is said and done. And we fight with Democrats and we fight with Republicans, and we probably fight more with Donald Trump than others, but we are joined. So we have to kind of make this work. In the longer term, and maybe get our own act together, as you've all said, and do the stuff we should have done anyway. And, be a little resentful that it's Donald Trump that's making us do it, but that we need to do. Look, thank you all very much. This is the kind of calm, rational discussion we kind of need at this point. So I'm very grateful that that you're sharing your time with us so that we can just think some larger thoughts than just always being reactive. So to Tasha Kheiriddin and Margaret McCuaig-Johnston, and of course, Mark Norman, thank you for always making the case for the people who at the end of the day will be defending us one way or the other, however these things work out and that we need. So that is it for this edition of No Nonsense with Pamela Wallin and my favorite pod panel. And we'll see you again very soon for another edition. Who knows what we'll be talking about, but I would bet a lot of the issues might be similar. We'll see you very soon. Thanks.